All right, so here in this part of the campus, right at our feet, is this dolomite pavement, dolomite limestone, 425 million years old. Now, 425 million years ago, this landmass was much further south of us, 20 degrees south of the equator. Overhead would have been about 100 feet of ocean, a shallow sea, and on this site would have been the famous Silurian reef, a coral reef that supported a variety of different animals. Coral primarily, but other invertebrates, and of course probably some other predatory animals. Well, over time, these animals lived and died, especially the coral shells, got crushed down to form this sedimentary kind of rock. Since 425 million years ago, the landmass has drifted further north to its present location, about 44 degrees north of the equator. And in that time, the seas have receded and land masses have sprung up a bit. And now we have this sedimentary rock. This forms the parent material for our local soils. If it's not right at the surface, it's just beneath this shallow soil. In spots, if you want to take a look across the way there, we've got dolomite outcroppings that are found throughout this little river riparian area. And this particular rock creates the foundation for some of the features up at the fen that we'll talk more about. Anyway, so right here we've got this feature on the landscape, this dolomite wall, cultural artifact, man-made certainly, and it was once speculated that this may have been constructed by prisoners of the Civil War, although we never actually came up with any artifacts, buttons, or other items from that period, so that probably isn't what happened. What I think may have happened is that the farmer was pulling slabs of limestone out of the fields where he wanted to put in row crops, and this is a good place to put a rock right on a section line, defining the boundaries of two sections on a topographic map. So it serves as a nice cultural feature. It turns out to be really nice habitat for moss and other critters that like to live in the nooks and crannies of the wall, mice and snakes and insect life. So it's just another nice defining feature of the campus natural areas. So let's go further up trail and see what we can find. So here we are, standing in the fen, who many consider the jewel of Joliet Junior College's main campus. You can build buildings and laboratories anywhere, but to try to recreate the unique geologic, hydrologic, and biological features that gave rise to this fen is nearly impossible. It's a one-of-a-kind, the jewel. I want to point out this plant before I forget, although it's unforgettable once you see it. This is Great Angelica, and it's one of the many plants that define this natural feature on the landscape. And this fen is defined by its hydrology, which is the movement of water across a landscape. And at this point on the landscape, we're in a shallow depression. If you look around in the surrounding area, there's uplands, and just beneath us is that dolomite limestone, layer after layer of this rock that's porous, and so surface waters work their way down into the subsurface areas and start to flow across and through this cracked up limestone. In the process, the surface waters and subsurface waters start to dissolve the dolomite limestone and take up the mineral content of calcium and magnesium carbonates and create a soil and water that has a pH above 7, which makes it an alkaline kind of environment. And that is in part what defines a fen. Now, the vegetation that starts to accumulate over many years dies and forms a peaty soil that's partially decomposed, but not completely. It acts as an enormous sponge that stores a lot of water to help with water control so that we don't get excessive flooding downstream. It also stores a lot of carbon from the atmosphere, so it serves as a really important carbon sink to help to offset global warming and climate change. And these peaty soil conditions that are alkaline create a soil environment that only a small subset of unique plants are uniquely adapted to, like the great angelica. And there are other plants like Joe Pye weed, turtlehead, great blue, lobelia, marsh marigolds. I see some blue flag iris in flower just below. All these broad-leaved plants right here are blue flag iris. The list goes on and on. The major plant that you see growing in here, it looks like a grass, easily mistaken for a grass, but in fact this is called tussock sedge, and it's very distantly related to grasses. Sedges, unlike grasses, have triangular edges, and grasses, on the other hand, have two blades that create a round stem, while the sedge has three blades that creates a triangular stem. But the tussock sedge really defines this fen and sedge meadow complex that we have in this area. I wanted to just take a moment and listen. There's actually quite a few sounds in this soundscape that's part of the landscape, along with the passing airplane and the low drone of traffic off of I-80 to the south. You'll hear a lot of bird life. I hear field sparrows in the uplands, dick cicels in the uplands, red-winged blackbirds, indigo buntings, a northern oriole, an eastern bluebird. These are the sounds of a healthy, functioning ecosystem, a landscape that's alive. The sounds of these birds indicate that they're busy raising young, and there's plenty of food to produce the next generation of bird life. I also brought us up slope so you could take a look down into that shallow depression we call the fen, and this gives us that perspective of how the uplands are supporting these low-lying fens. Without the supportive water flow that's trickling in and seeping down into the fen would perhaps dry out, and we would lose the plants in that unique ecosystem. So the uplands are tied to the lowlands, and the fen eventually supplies water further down creek to the campus lake. So JJC, in an effort to better manage its watershed, has put a lot of time and money, millions of dollars, into restoring and managing our part of the watershed. And so all these uplands supply a relatively clean supply of water into the fen. As the water moves through the subsoils, the plants take up any excess nutrients, making it their own. The water continues to move into the fen and then downstream, first into the campus lake, where it's hopefully been cleansed a bit by our fen and surrounding uplands. That in turn empties into the Rock Run Creek, which then empties into the I&M Canal, into the Des Plaines, becomes part of the Illinois River, flows into the great Mississippi River, all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. This, yet another marvelous plant along the way. I don't know if you know what this is. I'm going to break a leaf, and you can see that there's this white, milky sap coming from the leaf in the major vein there. It's also starting to accumulate on the edge of this leaf. This is the famous common milkweed. And milkweed has been in the news quite a bit because this is the principal larval food source for the monarch butterfly. And monarch butterflies aren't doing so well. Over 90% of the original population in North America has been lost. Only 10% of the original population persists now, and that's in part because of the loss of its larval food source, milkweed. We've done an exceptional job of eliminating weeds from across the landscape. Now, well, we couldn't have done all the work that we've done here on JJC's campus without help from outside agencies. And a while back, I want to say 2006 or so, we were awarded $35,000 as part of a matching grant. JJC provided the other $35,000 for an Illinois Department of Natural Resource Conservation 2000 grant. And we were awarded this money to start this phase of the restoration, restoring approximately 10 acres in adjacent lands to the fen. And so one of the proposals was to do massive clearing of this plant that happens to be growing inside this cage. And this is European buckthorn. And at one time, prior to 2006, what we see as open landscape today was crowded with this plant, obviously from Europe. And European buckthorn creates a very dense shade, so dense that any plant trying to grow underneath it in the shade fails. So a lot of the money was used to clear out buckthorn, and that was effective initially. And then a portion of the funds was used to buy native plants that we put into cages like this. And we had dozens of these cages. And we put the native plants inside the cage to protect it from deer browse. JJC has a lot of deer, overpopulation of deer, and it's caused detrimental impact to not only the native vegetation, but to the agricultural fields that they're trying to grow corn and soybean. In any event, a few plants did persist. I just noticed right here, this plant just starting to set seed is golden Alexanders. And this was one of the plants that we planted. However, the weeds came back in full force. So it's a cautionary tale about restoration work. You can put a lot of time, energy, and money into restoring a landscape, but you've got to continuously come back and check the status of how things are growing. I just noticed here, this is porcupine grass. Look at the quill-like seeds on that. Okay? This is porcupine grass, and I don't recall seeing it up here, although I don't get out as much as I should. But a plant that indicates, some high quality prairie. It's got a unique, very long awn that's coiled, and when the seed comes loose, and I'll pull this one off, got a real sharp point, it'll drop into the soil like that, and then this long structure called an awn changes its shape and direction depending on the humidity of the air, and it will rotate back and forth and basically self-sow it into the soil. Well, this is a unusual location on our remnant prairie. You notice that the area is enclosed, some heavy wire mesh, and this designates a planting of the federally endangered leafy prairie clover, Dahlia foliosa. And back around 2006, we were given plants by the U.S. Forest Service at the Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie to establish some populations here on campus because we have the right environment for this plant, the rocky, dry dolomite soils. And we planted 25 plants here from 4 different local populations, and then we have another 25 plants planted a little bit downslope. And we drilled out holes, put in the plant plugs, watered and weeded for a full year, and then it was hands-off time. The plants were going to have to make it on their own. So now we're talking about 11 years. This morning I counted 12, at least 12 plants coming back on their own. So about 50%, a little bit better maybe than 50% of the original plants are persisting. They may even be dropping seed and starting to self-seed now. And that would be a good sign that we have a self-sustaining population. So a success story in conservation. And it also provides us an opportunity to teach students about rare endangered plants, the need for unique habitat, and maintaining and managing these open grasslands. So this marks the north edge of the JJC property. The college has about 365 acres total on its main campus on Holbolt Road. About 124 of those acres are designated natural areas, what we like to call our outdoor teaching and learning laboratory. And it's served us for decades to getting students out here to learn about the natural world. And it's in this location that I want to point out as you go upslope there a little bit, and then down through here, we have a gas pipeline, and there's an easement that the gas company has that they maintain this area open so that they can do repairs or whatever they need to work on the pipeline. Now, the proposed road that Cullinan Properties is suggesting would go right through this area from west to east, connecting their property development to Holbolt Road to the east. And this is the approximate footprint where this 2-lane road would go. Now, my understanding, you cannot put a road right on top of an existing pipeline. Therefore, that'll mean moving the footprint of the road a little bit to the south, which puts the road right through the rare calcareous fen, through the remnant prairie where the leafy prairie clover is, and you put in a road here and it really will change the integrity of the natural areas. JJC's property is right to and adjacent to the Will County Forest Preserve District land. There's a large open lake to my north. That too is draining down through and into the fen to the campus lake. And a road is just going to really break up the ecological integrity of the site. It's going to disrupt water flow. A proposed road through here is going to generate lots of runoff, salt in particular in the winter months, and it's definitely going to damage and alter the chemistry of the fen and the surrounding landscape. This is just not the place to put a road.